So I started as a field staff, like I just mentioned, reading this manuscript and staring it over at kids who were, threatening each other's lives or stealing each other's food or pouring calamine lotion on the head of one of my fellow field staff. And then I'm over there reading, bonds of anguish, bonds of love, like. There's got to be a way to, it's an instruction manual, right? You got to figure this out. And he's yelling obscenities at me. It just doesn't work that way. We can't just solve this stuff. So, hang with me for a while, watch the screen, and I'll be doing quite a bit of reading. But this is part of a journey that happens with children who come to the wilderness. You know what? I'll have a seat. Okay. So everybody, it's story time is what it is. Okay, so here we go. Soul Walk. I found myself standing on the reddish-brown, dusty dirt of a primitive two-track road in the middle of nowhere with a bundle of supplies they had placed on my back. I asked my escorts where I was. One of them said, "You're in a wilderness therapy program now. Your guide will answer any more questions you may have." Just about then, a small-statured, primitive-looking man came around the corner of a tree, said hello, bid the others goodbye. The sun was beginning to set as I stood watching the truck that brought me disappear back down the only filament of civilization that could be scanned in any direction. The little man turned and stated softly, "This is your soul walk. Come with me." He had some things to say about ancient world cultures, vision quests, walkabouts. He explained that the name of this journey was unimportant, but that the purpose was the most important thing in my life thus far, and that its purpose would be discovered only by me. I interrupted him and blurted out, "How long do I have to stay here?" He stated back gently, "Part of your journey will have to do with asking better questions." Asking better questions? I quickly retorted. "Well then, if it gets me out of here faster, what's a good question?" He gave me no more explanation. I came to find that rather than clarifying every nuance of meaning he was conveying, he expected me to figure out the meanings of most of what he had to say on my own. But a main theme he always seemed to return to were a couple lines he would softly mutter in a sing-songy way, "Your responsibility, your responsibility." He continued by explaining what was expected to me to keep me safe and a few expressions of encouragement, and that was all for that night. I just stared at the road as the sun went down. I don't remember much about that first meeting, but I do remember him saying, "Your soul walk, your vision quest is up to you, just like anything else. You will make it what it will be." In my eyes, he was my weird, crazy outdoor prison guard, but I felt only compassion from him. That was the first day. Trees. It was a quick lesson the night before when he pointed out, matter-of-factly, the dirt is softer under the juniper trees. You see, the dirt is mixed with the fallen leaves and bark. It's slightly warmer here off the solid ground in the open. Trees are your friends that way. Get to know them. Get to know who your friends are. There it was again, an odd statement like asking better questions. Get to know them? Get to know who your friends are? It sounded so dumb that night, but from him, throughout the experience, I learned a lot about trees. Pine needles stacked thick enough can keep a person from freezing overnight. Dry sycamore leaves across wet ground will keep the moisture away from you. Fallen tamarask duff will hold the shape of your body like those modern space-age mattresses. While in oak country, it's difficult for someone to sneak up on you. Oaks provide food, and they're good for burning too. Old cottonwood bark comes off in big sheets. Rain-shedding shelters come a lot easier that way. And you can make rope from the inner bark. Willow trees from 3 miles away indicate the presence of water. That's a pretty good signal in the desert. And if you're hurt, willow bark tea takes the edge off. Some trees are good for making bows, others good for making arrows. Some are good for bowls, others for spoons. Anyway, get to know them, he said. Get to know who your friends are. I'm glad I did. Laws. Get up, time to go, he announced simply. He was sparing with words, but I learned soon enough to take him seriously. The sun keeps moving. If you want to stay in the shade, you must also move. When the sun is gone, you should have already prepared your things for the night. The sun won't punish you for your not preparing by staying down longer the next morning, but it will simply carry on its natural course. These are laws to recognize, laws of nature. Learn them. Learn what the laws are. Over time, I began to recognize a few things. If I wanted a fire, I had to make one. If I wanted to stay dry, I had to build a shelter or find one. If I wanted not to have a headache, I needed to drink more water. If I wanted to have a better time hiking, I had to change how I carried my burdens and how I walked. If something broke, I could fix it. If something tore, I could sew it. If I wanted warmth throughout the night, I had to gather more wood beforehand. Eating food is a matter of practical energy for the day, not satisfaction for right now. I could build a relatively pleasant wilderness life or an awful one. And I saw other laws too. Try to make amends, and you just might restore trust. Work, and you will feel better about yourself. Forgive, and you'll find your own burdens lifted. Face your patterns, and those patterns will become clearer to you. Make better choices, get better results. Learn them. Learn what the laws are, he said. I began to see laws everywhere. Pillow walls. I leaned up squinting from my juniper duff bed. But wait, where's my Fruit Loops, my Xbox, my computer, my real bed? I need to take a shower. These aren't the shoes I wanted. I want to be with my friends. I haven't anything decent to wear today. Leave me alone. Those were things I would have said, things I used to say, but it was clear that none of that fit out there. It didn't work anymore. It certainly didn't work with him. In fact, nothing I did worked. During my time in the wilderness, I tried all my old strategies. I didn't see them as strategies then, yet I employed them nonetheless. I was good at what I did, but he never seemed to be fazed in the least. I threw a fit once. He walked off. I yelled obscenities at him several times. He never once cursed back. I went to hit him. He dodged and kind of danced away. I went to hit someone else. He interceded deftly, yet without hurting me, and from what I could tell, without being mad either. I went to hurt myself. He removed all implements. I cried and moaned. He waited. I tried to demean him once. I came up with the best insult specifically tailored to him. He smiled, not one of those sarcastic smiles or a I feel sorry for you smile, just a kindness. Some young people from their teenage years right into their young adult years find reasons to resist or rebel. I did. I often did it because of the reactions I would get. It was like if you reacted the way I expected you to, with anger, embarrassment, or blame, and then I felt somehow justified or even gratified for doing what I just did. I never got the reactions out of him. At first it drove me crazy, so I tried harder. Then it was like throwing a ball against a pillow wall. It's easy to catch a ball that bounces back at you through another's reactivity. It's much more difficult to go pick the ball back up again as it hits a pillow wall and drops without returning, just to go back up to your starting point and throw the ball again, to have to drop it straight down again. Ugh. I never got the reactivity from him, so I ran out of energy for that. I eventually stopped fighting. It was like the fight, the useless fight I call it now, was invited out of me. I later figured out that I can be a pillow wall too, that I could follow his example, invite the fight out of others who treat me less kind than he did. Roots. We started up a small dry creek bed that morning going east into the sun. We were on our way over a high ridge to drop down into another canyon for the next night. Just before the top, I demanded a break. I exclaimed out loud how I hated my parents for making me go there. They made you come here? He suddenly questioned. He ran over to where I was sitting down. He would get excited at times like those. Teaching times, I later found. They made you come here? Yes, I exclaimed. They manipulated me. I didn't really know what this would be like. I'm not like everybody else here. My problems weren't as big. That's not the program for me. Then, with great interest and enthusiasm, he began to ask me questions about my life, my past, my choices, my friends, my activities. I noticed something in that moment. He seemed transfixed. He wanted to know my heart. Over time, I felt my story being pulled out of me, pulled for full viewing, especially to be fully viewed by me. On that ridge, he also rehearsed to me a lot of what he already knew about my life and the choices I'd made in it. I suppose that he'd talked to my parents for that information. Something inside me even then hoped that he would talk to my parents that way with the whole teaching time thing. I later found out from my parents that he did. As you have guessed by now, I was no perfect kid. In fact, I was screwed up in a lot of ways. The answers to his questions made that painfully and truthfully obvious. He then talked for a while about principles of agency and consequences and accountability and, you guessed it, responsibility. It's all kind of a blur now, but the point he made on the ridge that day was that I was the root cause of my situation, and that once I accepted that, I could begin to cause a new situation. He pointed out to a nearby pinyon pine, which had several exposed roots. The root of it, he proclaimed rather loudly. See the root, know the root, accept the root, love the root, change the root. Change the plant. Nobody but you is the root. Flutes. That particular day's hike was particularly horrible. I felt I had every right to be mad, every right to resist. That evening, after camp was set up and we'd had a meager portion of ash cakes and pinto beans, if y'all want to know what an ash cake is, I can tell you later. I had retained just enough energy to feel sorry for myself, sit and stare at the fire. My guide backed away from the fire just a bit, turned to his leather bag, which he always had about his shoulder, and pulled out a simple wood flute. There was nothing else more interesting going on, and that was kind of a cool-looking flute. He began to play. It may have seemed like a noise out of place anywhere else, but it was a welcome sound there. Dare I ask, dare I bend, dare I break? At that moment, I didn't see the process that would soon be unfolding, but I finally asked, where did you get that? He played a few seconds more. I made it, he said. How? I asked incredulously. He stopped playing, moved closer to the fire, looked right into my eyes, and asked, do you really want to know? I paused for a moment. What kind of question is that? I asked, didn't I? He asked me with such seriousness, though. For a moment I thought, well, no, if you're going to be like that about it. But then I thought, well, yeah, that's a cool thing. Sure, I answered. I really want to know. Fine, I really want to know. So he began teaching me how to make a flute, and over time many other things too. Looking back on it now, I can see what happened. I don't know if he did it on purpose, but from that day forward I asked him a lot of questions. I had turned him into my mentor. My agency had been engaged, and I began to choose mentors for myself. The question, where did you get that, is not unlike other questions such as, how do you know that? How did I get here? How can I get there? Why do I feel this way? How can I let go? Who can help me? Will you please help me find the way? These were the questions I began to be able to ask. My questions were getting better. This taught me a lot about agency, my ability to choose and to recognize the results of my choices. I began to feel my agency engaged in new ways, ways that helped me literally feel better about who I was as a person. And this brought a sense of contentment and, well, an inner hope, a hope for myself that I had not felt in a long time. Warriors. We were traversing across the base of a broad cliff face, white towering 1,000-foot cliffs spread across the entire visible territory, creating what seemed to be an impassable barrier between us and our destination to the north. We had to find the elusive single route that made its way through them. Traveling crosswise over multiple cliff-based mini drainages is like riding a roller coaster from hell that you're not actually riding, but hiking. I knew that after we crossed however many of these stupid things we were going to encounter, we still were going to have to go up the 1,000-foot trail itself. It all had become more than I could bear. Even with all that I had learned, at the bottom of the 6th or 7th draining, I threw my pack off and began to sob. This is too much. I can't handle this anymore. Perhaps if I was pathetic enough, someone would pluck me right up from the desert and pop me right back into my couch at home. Then I looked up, with tear trails running down my dirt-stained face, wondering if my crying had elicited any small degree of rescue-type empathy I was banking on. He was standing a few feet away, looking up the hill in the direction of our travel, as if completely ignoring me. Then, after some silence, he inquired of me, what would a warrior do? Oh, here we go again, the idiot with the idioms. So I thought about it for a moment, as I knew would be required of me, then labored out something about being strong, overcoming obstacles, working hard, getting over my issues, blah, 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 stuff like that. The kind of thing I thought he would want to hear. I suppose I could have been more convincing if those white cliffs hadn't been so effectively victimizing me. He walked over. He walked over, kneeled down, and said intently, "A person not fighting the good fight is a person volunteering to be slaughtered. This is a person asking by default to be massacred. This is not losing the fight. This is never entering the war and therefore being slaughtered. This is not being a warrior. On the other hand, a person fighting the good fight, the useful fight, may have lost battles. That's okay, but they're not willing to stop fighting. The good fight is always there, and though not the perfect fighter, the warrior still envisions the win. That is who they are. Now, right now, what would a warrior do? Not say in order to please someone, do." It was times like those that both stunned and somehow inspired me. It's not so much what he said, but the situation in which I found myself and how it was used day after day. I was actually living in a metaphor, not just hearing one. In that moment, and other moments like it, my true battle scene came more and more into view. What would a warrior do eventually became a mantra to me, a sacred utterance. And by the way, I made it up to the top of the cliffs that day. Stone circles. Towards the end of my stay out there, something happened to me. I'll never forget it. I woke up to the sound of a bull roar. This was by now a familiar sound to me. It was one of the items he had taught me how to make a few weeks earlier. I was told that if I heard one, I was to go to it. So I started up the hill to the west. The sound was coming from the top. When he saw me, he approached me with great respect and then led me to a circle of stones he had prepared. He motioned for me to enter the circle and to be seated. He then sat on the opposite side. He explained that the other spaces of the circle were occupied, as it were, by my family members and others who knew me, because they also knew of the good I had done, what I had begun to become, and the me toward whom I had been returning. I didn't know what he was talking about. He hadn't told me anything I had to be doing or of anything required of me while I was there with him. I then noticed between us on the ground a small metal pendant in the shape of a figure. He said the pendant and the symbol it contained represented changes he and others had seen in me. He mentioned specific instances where I had done good, had been helpful, had let go of grudges, had overcome pain, had surmounted difficulties, had sought to make amends, had spoken truthfully about my life's story. He explained with a sharp sincerity, the real you is coming out. The real you is being recovered. Although you didn't know it, you have been experiencing this from your first day. Every person recovers as they heal, and each does so in their own way. You are the only you this world has to offer. See the blessing this world has in you. You always were the gift to the world. I invite you to see you. He gave me the pendant to remind me of the good I had accomplished. I still have it. I sometimes wear it even now. I know I was a troubled person. He helped me see that, but he saw the good. He saw my good. He made my lightness just as clear to me as I already knew my darkness had been. He helped me see who I am and who I was becoming, and it is a me I want to keep. Unseen secrets. I spent several weeks with this man. The way he treated me, coupled with his unwavering lack of reactions to my trouble, made it seem as though he knew something undisclosed about me. Unseen secrets, I call them now. I call them unseen secrets because at the time I didn't even know how to explain them to myself. But they were nonetheless part of me, my inner language as a teenager and as a young person, a language with which he was fluent. I have figured out what some of my secrets were and are. Trust me, and I will be inclined to earn that trust. Coerce me, I guarantee resistance, even if the resistance looks like compliance. If you show me what you want for my behavior together with a reward for such behavior, I'll do what you want me to do, but that doesn't mean I want to do it. And when the rewards leave, so likely will my compliant behavior. If you excuse my behavior because of my circumstances, difficulty, or diagnosis, so will I. Treat my label, I'll adopt the label you're treating. Indulge me or be afraid of my reactions, I'll manipulate. Control me, I'll rebel. I am at an age and place in my life where either addiction can take hold or hope can take hold. You can help me clearly see my crossroad by first seeing me clearly. Addressing your own sickness will help me address mine. Finding your own sanity will help me find mine. Your example will always shine brighter to me than your skill at consequencing me. You will change my behavior by addressing my way of being. Your way of being influences mine. In fact, your mindset matters more than any other singular facet or skill you may have when it comes to your efforts to help me change. After addressing your mindset, figure out how to engage me powerfully, and you give me a chance to choose for myself. Help me experience how it feels inside to be the real me, the healthy me, the happy me, and I will remember that feeling in times of trouble. Seeing my goodness and showing it to me gives me a chance to strive to keep it. These were the secrets he somehow mysteriously and miraculously knew. I suppose he goes about, even now, still knowing them. Voices. Many of my desert days were spent in what most normal people would call sheer boredom. After all, there was absolutely nothing entertaining, exciting, or outwardly adventurous going on. There would be entire stretching days when the little man wouldn't say much at all. About the middle of my stay out there, one particularly quiet afternoon, I blurted out, "I am so bored. There's nothing fun to do. All we do is hike and live out here in the middle of nowhere. I don't have anything to look forward to every day." He stopped, and I knew what was about to happen. Another teaching moment had arrived. Boredom, he said, is nothing more than a misunderstanding of the value of silence. Most people don't understand silence. They tend to avoid prolonged and uninterrupted exposure to it. They avoid silence because they don't like the voices they hear while living in the mindset that needs noise or needs to be making noise. There are many voices, but only one that matters. Allow the silence to make your true inner voice become clear to you. That true voice that doesn't have all the answers, but it asks good questions. And with good questions, answers come. Over time, he helped me understand that I had a lot of noise and many false voices in my head and heart. The voices that allow me to excuse myself for my actions. The voices that keep me focused on blaming others. The voices of self-doubt, self-blame, self-deception. These voices are the first ones I hear when I start to be silent. But after prolonged exposure to honest silence, the inner true voice begins to rise above the other voices and the other noise. It's the voice that helps me understand that while living truthfully, I am capable of hearing the truth that comes from my true self. It's the voice that gives me clues as to what to do next. Profound change is accessible to the degree that one's true voice is accessible. This true voice is where my senses come from, my internal sense toward others. Mine began to be accessible to me. Without noise, without false voices, my senses were, well, making sense. By hearing my true voice, I would hear the callings from others. Would I learn to walk differently with those around me? Hearing my true voice, would I respond to those who need me? Every day, the answer more often became yes. It turns out that the adventure was the internal adventure, through not having a break from the constant, unassuming starkness of that which without, so that I could more clearly and constantly inquire into that which was within. I had to have the long interrupted stretches of this type of time in order to arrive to the place that takes no physical steps to get to, me. I'll never forget my first night when I quipped, "Well then what's a good question?" I had no idea what I was asking or why that night he just smiled at me. But later when I realized what a good question, what's a good question is, my own smile came out. And it was as though the desert smiled with me. My beginning. You may be wondering who this little man is. He could be an ancient, sagacious native of any old Native American culture, Oriental, Aboriginal, Bedouin, African desert dweller, Highlander from the North Countries. He could be a wise therapist a young person and family could find in an hour of emotional need. He could be a world-class philosopher who can explain some of the most profound yet basic truths about human nature and help people apply them. He could be a tender parent who simply cares deeply about children, a gifted mentor, a skilled life coach. Well, he's all of these. You see, he's not really a little primitive man, but many people. And his name? Well, his name is the names of all those who are with me on my wilderness journey, and perhaps most importantly, a large number of wilderness field instructors who are literally out there walking in the wilderness places every single day right now. You may also be wondering who I am. Let me tell you. My name is Aaron and Mark, Elliot and John, Alex and Marissa, Angela and Elsie, Samantha and Mike, Thomas, Jennifer, Glenn and Garth, and so many other. So many other young people who have walked the reddish-brown, dusty dirt and slept next to the soft-ground junipers in that place I now call my beginning. I'm glad I was engaged to see the lessons. I'm glad I got to know who my friends are and the trees. I'm glad the useless fight was invited out of me and that the useful fight was begun in me. I'm glad I was invited to see the truth about me, and I'm glad my healing began and that my hope started to shine through. I'm glad I learned to ask better questions. I'm glad they all helped me see who I am, and I'm so glad they knew my secrets. I will forever be grateful to this little man and to those who brought me to him. I left the wilderness months or years or decades ago, but that wilderness place and those wilderness people will never, ever leave me.